Mike, thank you very, very much. What a wonderful, generous introduction. Thank you for those words. Thank you, more importantly, for your public service. I have watched Mike Krusee's work as a thoughtful public official whose ideas cross partisan lines. You got the sense of that today, but I want to publicly thank him for his work in the transportation area and other places where he's brought this thoughtful brand of leadership to the future of Texas. Mike, thank you very much for your work. Chairman Hank Dittmer, congratulations on being chair of this organization, and I noticed that you're on the program later working, advancing ideas in the environmental area. Congratulations on a career of important contributions in that regard. And to my friend of many years, John Nordquist, who was the mayor of Milwaukee at the time that I was mayor of San Antonio. He had a long, productive tenure that caught the nation's attention because of, for example, the stopping of a freeway that did not need to tear up a Milwaukee neighborhood, and he kept that from happening. But also, it's crystal clear the changes, the improvements in Milwaukee on his watch. One of the most livable of America's northern cities, and you're fortunate to have him as the paid executive of the Congress for the New Urbanism. John, congratulations on lots of work over lots of years. Lots of reasons why it's a treat, and I was touched by Mike's introduction, but one of them is that being introduced by Mike Krusee, who is a Texan, a person from the multicultural mix that is Austin, there's a reasonable chance that on being introduced here, I will have my name pronounced correctly. Mike, thank you very much. My name in Spanish is Cisneros, for those who know how to roll their R's, but I accept the English pronunciation of Cisneros, but just not the things that I am called when I range 75 miles north of San Antonio or to other points. On one occasion, I was introduced as Henry Cisneros. On another, I was introduced to a group of doctors. Now, this was in San Antonio. I was mayor at the time. I went over on a Monday morning to welcome a convention. These are doctors who I presume were studying rare diseases all weekend long, because when the moment to introduce the mayor came, he'd obviously not been prepared. It's at a minimum awkward to watch a person try to get through an introduction and never mention the person's name who's being introduced. Until the moment of truth, he couldn't avoid it any longer. He said, "Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Mayor Sclerosis." So after you've been introduced as a disease to a group of doctors, you think maybe it doesn't get any worse. But when I was at HUD, I went over to the National Press Club to do what they call the State of the City address, and it's carried on C-SPAN, so people call in, and a lady called in the course of the afternoon, spoke to my assistant, and she said, "I'd like to take issue with something the secretary said, but I don't think I can pronounce his name." And then I guess she had like a moment of ethnic inspiration or something, because she said, "I think his name was something like Cheese Nachos." So after all of that, to come to Austin, be introduced by Mike Krusee, and have it pronounced correctly. Mike, thank you for all the details in the introduction. I have been looking forward to this conference and this address since John Nordquist called me and asked me to be here, because of my immense respect and appreciation for the Congress, for the concept of the new urbanism, for your roles in articulating a set of principles and executing concrete examples of such an important school of design thought. For the last 15 years, I've watched with admiration the evolution of these principles and the advance of projects which resonate with the way Americans want to live. And I've observed how these principles and projects converge with the basic forces that are reshaping our metropolitan areas, our cities, our neighborhoods. The new urbanism appropriately and fortunately has grown in influence into a recognizable architectural school of thought, and more importantly, a movement shaping American living. The new urbanism comes at the right time, after the industrial era ended and a new economy shapes our nation's urban places. From manufacturing in the nation's cities to the new media and healthcare and business services and higher education and biosciences, industries that are more city-friendly and allow for the recycling of ground that we thought was lost forever to industrial uses, and now poses the possibility of linking these new industries and places where people can live. The new urbanism comes at a right time to respond to centripetal forces that are bringing people back toward the center. Gas prices, for example, and the cost of travel to distant suburbs. The new urbanism comes at the right time to personify John Nesbitt's high-tech, high-touch megatrends idea. At a time when technology makes life faster and more impersonal, people seek kind of instinctively the warmth of more traditional connections. And when that can be offered in the physical places where we live, it's an important contribution. The new urbanism comes at the right time to respond to the limits of sprawl, as we find distances to far-flung exurbs and congested freeways simply making it impossible to sustain this continued investment in more roads out to the edges and more infrastructure of water and sewers and power out to the limits of the metropolitan area. The new urbanism comes at the right time to prepare for demographic shifts in American society. The growth of baby boomers wanting to come back into central neighborhoods, the middle class minorities whose income capacity is growing and making it possible to offer real commercial opportunities in cities, and the growth of immigrants, which in many cities are allowing for record population growth. Chicago, for example, had suffered 5 censuses, 50 years of consecutive declines in its population until 2000, when its population ticked up, mathematically totally attributable to the growth of immigrants. New York City, which as we know in the 1980s was the subject of articles about its imminent decline, by 2000 had reached its all-time population high of 8 million people, and now city planners in New York are talking seriously about preparing for a city of 9 million people by 2030. The new urbanism comes at the time that these forces and others are converging to create a moment of metropolitan salience. Our urban places have historically been the settings where our great national dynamics have played out, where our people work, where they learn, where they recreate, where they live, and where they govern themselves. In American history, our urban places have been the building blocks of national progress. The Brookings Institution's recent report, A Blueprint for American Prosperity, Unleashing the Potential of a Metropolitan Nation, tells us that the history of American progress is in substantial measure a metropolitan and urban phenomenon. The issue as presented by Brookings is how to create the next wave of American progress, how to sustain the nation's prosperity, how to extend the greatness of the American experiment. And Bruce Katz, my friend, the chairman of the Brookings Center on Metropolitan Studies, offers a framework. First, because dynamic forces are reshaping our world, we have to think in new ways. Secondly, nations must act upon their assets, and we must know how to build upon those assets. Thirdly, U.S. metropolitan areas are the focal points of our national assets. We must support the places on which our national prosperity depends. And fourthly, understanding of metropolitan places is needed to create a new partnership using those metropolitan areas as the platforms that we know they can be. Just as metropolitan areas have been engines for some of the greatest advances in American history, so too can they serve the 21st century imperatives of national progress. Our metropolitan areas can sustain work and the hope of advancement for all our people because 76% of the knowledge jobs in America are located in just the 100 largest metropolitan areas. Our metropolitan areas can support learning, which will unleash human ingenuity because 74% of the Tier 1 research institutions and dollars are in the 100 largest metro areas. Our metropolitan areas can uplift our spirits because critical masses of the nation's creative talent flourish there. Our metropolitan areas are home to the neighborhoods where we preserve safety and dignity and family peace of mind because 65% of the nation's people live in just those 100 largest metro areas. Our metropolitan areas are places where we must govern ourselves with productiveness and inclusiveness because 76% of the nation's GDP is generated in those 100 urban places. If we look at all the forces that are converging to create importance for our metropolitan areas and contribute to this centripetal dynamic that I've described, they're interesting. We learned in the 1980s that when the nation has a strong economy, the cities, the urban places do well as businesses reach to workers that they've never reached before as the labor market tightens. And then when we have qualitative change added on top of that numerical growth, the change I described earlier from manufacturing to new media and business services and exports and higher education, we see these as more city-friendly, lending themselves to city uses. We're finding entrepreneurial city governments that are less interested in the patronage of old and recognizing their role as catalysts to bring together public and private investment, to channel all that energy in more productive ways. We find community development corporations that were created in the 1960s in an era of the need to advocate, even intimidate local officials, today becoming very sophisticated intermediaries for developing neighborhood business districts and homes. Anchor institutions that once would have left the cities today are making investments, from universities like the University of Southern California in Los Angeles, Marquette in Milwaukee, institutions like Trinity College in Hartford, cultural centers like the New Jersey Arts Center in Newark, lending new life to Newark, all kinds of business commitments to central city locations across the country, and we see those anchor institutions playing a critical role. The University of Pennsylvania and its role in Philadelphia, many others. We've watched a minority middle class that the nation didn't know existed. We thought of central cities and minorities and instantly saw a glass that was half empty, and today we recognize the glass is at least half full with people who are entrepreneurs, people like the Dominican population in the Bronx, 1 million strong, that has taken those neighborhoods that once were the obligatory photograph for presidential candidates of urban devastation, converted into thousands of homes along Charlotte Street, and case after case across America. We see baby boomers and others in the creative class, the young professionals wanting the urban stimulation that makes possible places like Lodo in Denver and the West End of Dallas and so many other places across the country where the force of that attraction and urban lifestyle attracts. I mentioned earlier the role of immigrants in this process, the influence of environmental alarms, environmental concerns, as we recognize we can't afford to continue to build to the edges. Well, the new urbanism, we have found, uniquely responds to this metropolitan moment at the three scales that have always been the currency of the new urbanism. I was impressed with a paper that I saw recently written by Peter Calthorpe, one of the persons present at the creation, one of the founders, who described it so clearly: the building, the neighborhood, the region. At the level of the building, the new urbanism is borrowed from resident American housing forms, porches and stoops and backyards that combine privacy and ownership and identity, balanced off with sociability and connectedness in the neighborhood. The warmth of the materials themselves, the shapes, connotes a solidity of enduring values, that high-tech, high-touch connection I mentioned earlier of home and family and community. At the neighborhood scale, new urbanism mixes functions and uses and mixes income levels, very importantly, with the use of non-intimidating building heights, achieving human scale, a comfort level for human beings, and the integration of thoughtful amenities. providing connections to the economic life of the larger community through accessible transportation methods. At the metropolitan scale, connecting the city and the suburbs not only physically, but recognizing their mutual interest in the distribution of the mix of housing types across the metropolitan area, and recognizing the importance of generators of jobs to create opportunities across the metropolitan area. Well, we've seen these three scales or principles applied in the early new urbanism prototypes. Prototypes like Seaside or suburban models like Gaithersburg, Maryland. But my experience over the last decade is with path-breaking inner urban projects, the most central city manifestations of the new urbanism possible in public housing. I'd like to share with you today some examples that I've gleaned from around the country of the way the new urbanism has made an immense contribution in our cities. It's not generally thought of in this precise way, but as Hank said earlier, it's one of the really important contributions. And I want to thank, in advance of any comments, Peter Calthorpe and Tom Gallos and Ray Gindros and Elizabeth Plotters-Ibrecht and Andres Duani and others who I had the honor of calling in as Secretary of HUD to come to the department and review our early thinking about this prototype thing that eventually became Hope 6. And though we had daunting challenges, as you will see from a series of photographs I want to show you in a moment of the before, the contribution that they made has made this program immensely important and, in fact, reshaped cities. John and Mike, if you'd like to come down, you might be able to see better than this small monitor here. But what I'd like to do is to run you through a series of before and after photos, if I may. The first one you see there is a place called Holly Park in Seattle. It was temporary housing built for military workers with a large expanse of land making unauthorized access easy, police patrol difficult, and disconnected from the surrounding neighborhood. What you see next is the application of new urbanist principles. Actual photograph. It doesn't look like a photograph, but it is. It looks like a painting of a $275 million investment in a 118-acre neighborhood. 871 public housing units, as you saw in the last photo, were replaced with 1,400 single-family homes, townhomes, and apartments. This is New Holly. Homes in New Holly are mixed. 44% of the families below 50% of area median income. That's very, very good for an urban development. 44% below 50%, 25% slightly subsidized, and 35% market rate rentals and townhomes. The market rate units, such as these, sold for about $250,000, and they're reselling for $400,000. The physical redesign included in major ways the reinstitution of the road grid and particular attention to creating a neighborhood setting, what they called a neighborly campus, centered on a new public library branch, community classrooms, parks, gardens, senior housing, and we owe Weinstein AU, the architectural firm, credit for this effort. They won a charter award from the Congress for New Urbanism in 2002. The next one is Vaughn Homes in St. Louis, which is 4 towers totaling 658 units that look like this. Adjacent to the former Pruitt-Igoe, which you will recall was the first of the high-rise public housing that was torn down in the 1970s. Postmodernist architect Charles Jenks was quoted as saying the day Pruitt-Igoe came down, "This is the day modern architecture died." Here's another photo from Vaughn of a partially vacant, crime-dominated, frankly, building utilized as a drug market. This is Murphy Park, which is the replacement to Vaughn. This is on exactly the ground where where the buildings in the last picture were. It is not a Hope 6. It is a precursor to Hope 6 in that one of the principal persons involved in designing the Hope 6 program was Richard Barron of the firm McCormick, Barron and Salazar of St. Louis, and he applied the concepts that would become Hope 6, mixed financing, introducing the idea of mixed income on this project. 1/3 public housing, 1/3 tax credits, 1/3 market rate. Murphy Homes is 413 homes designed with a strong emphasis on human capital programming. It ended the isolation of the community by including amenities, a new school, job training center, after-school programs, computer training lab, and a community swimming pool. It included attractive landscaping with playgrounds, and that made possible 100 new private, unsubsidized single-family homes on adjacent land, as has happened in many of these cases where suddenly land that was off limits, no man's land in the cities, is transformed into magnets for private investment in the surrounding neighborhood all across America. And one of the reasons is investments such as this. The St. Louis Cardinals invest in a ball field for the children of the area on an adjacent site. This is Orchard Park in Boston. It was 28 buildings, half empty, so bad that when public housing tenants were offered tenancy here, they went on the 20,000 person long list, went to the end of a 20,000 person list before they would accept tenancy at Orchard Park because of its classic superblocks, its poorly maintained public spaces, its crime environment. Today, Orchard Park is called Orchard Gardens and looks like that. It is a community of 331 units. The density was decreased, unprotected open spaces were eliminated, a learning center provided. This is the work of Dominique Hides and Krukmanik, Trinity Partners, Madison Park Development, and Krusee Development, and has won the American Institute of Architects Center for Livable Communities Award and a National Association of Home Builders Choice Design and Planning Award. This is Martin Luther King in Philadelphia. 6 acres of high-rise buildings, 594 units, of which 200 were completely uninhabitable. I've been in this place, and others like it. And though the pictures that I'm about to show you, you would believe are impossible. No one could be asked to live in such places. This is the way they were. This is the interior stairways dominated by gangs. Mothers and children would have to be frisked by gang members before they're allowed into their own units. This is the hallways where mothers would tell me they feared seeing a red dot at the end of the hall because it meant that there was someone smoking a cigarette waiting for them who would hassle them as they walked to their units. This is buildings that I saw that reeked with the stench of urine. In several cities, the police wouldn't let the Secretary of Housing and the local mayor into the buildings until the buildings were swept, though we expect mothers and families and children to come into these buildings by themselves every day. The hallways, the staircases were drug markets and dangerous to patrol. In the place of Martin Luther King, today, a reality is this. The footprint of the site was augmented in order to allow for more persons to return to the area. Vacant and abandoned lots were integrated in order to allow more returnees. And they were integrated to the streetscape. This is designed by Torrey Gallis Partners. Mixed income, row homes, row houses, low-rise apartments, and all told, the project on completion received the 2006 Institute Homes for Regional and Urban Design Award. This is an aerial photograph which sort of says it all about isolation from the neighborhood, being cut off from the streetscape. This is a place called Cotter Lang Homes in Louisville. It became a place called Duval Park, which is one of the best in the country. It was 1,100 units of high crime ground, high poverty, barrack-style buildings. This is what they look like from ground level. Pretty grim places. This is Duval Park today. It is a community today that emphasized single-family detached homes. Though there are 613 rentals, There are also 450 units of home ownership, homes close to the street with front porches. This is a Ray Gindros initiative, Urban Design Associates of Pittsburgh and Community Builders of Boston, and ended up a true mixed-income community. Ray's pattern book, built on Louisville traditions of Victorian homes, arts and crafts units, and colonial revival, and a town center with a modernized elementary school, 2 upgraded parks, and an Olympic-sized swimming pool that, as I say, marks Park Duval as one of the more attractive of this generation of Hope 6 projects. This is High Point in Seattle, 716 units built in the 1940s. At that point, 1- and 2-story apartment buildings with a lot of gang activity and characterized by social isolation. Today, High Point is a 120-acre master plan community, 1,600 apartments and homes, characterized, even the rental units, by a concept that there came to be known as furnishability, which meant the ability to bring furniture in and live with enough space. In the previous High Point, families could not eat dinner together because the space was not large enough to put a full-size kitchen table. The for sale section of High Point attracted multiple builders. In order to add to the diversity of the street-level life, they provided small backyard spaces and porches and sidewalks, again centered on a public library. It functions as a community center and has an adjacent health center with a recreation center yet to come. Now, many of these projects are known for particular attributes. High Point is known for its environmental dimensions. It has an award-winning drainage system that captures rainwater through filtering swales planted with grass along the sides of roadways and porous concrete streets in order to preserve a salmon-bearing stream through the heart of the project. 100 legacy trees were preserved, 20 acres of parks and playground and trail system, and it won the nation's first Energy Star rated rental housing development award and an EPA award for smart growth. Mithun architects were the architects on this project. Finally, there is Lafayette Courts. This is the project where Mayor Schmoke, the mayor of Baltimore, and Governor Schaefer, the governor of Maryland, came to visit with me as HUD secretary and said, we want to take out all of the high-rise complexes in Baltimore over time. We know that these Hope 6 grants are given out on a one-by-one basis, but we want to propose to you a multi-year plan in which we eliminate them all, replace them all. A place called Flag, a place called Murphy, a place called Lexington, and this one called Lafayette. We started on that plan, and the result, that's what Lafayette looked like, a series of about 12 buildings, each of them massive in their scale. This is the day that the plunger was pushed to brown Lafayette. As you can see, its proximity to the downtown, but that was the effect that day. This is what Lafayette looks like today. It's called Pleasant View Gardens in Baltimore, and as you can see, it builds on the tradition of stoops made of marble, which you will see as you drive through older Baltimore neighborhoods. 228 row houses, 110 units of elderly buildings, 36 renovated apartments, with an emphasis on walkable neighborhood connected to the city's street system and adjacent to schools. It included daycare, recreation facilities, a community center, a medical center, 5 acres of active park space, and a street system that provided access to bus lines. Well, I wanted you to see in ways that words cannot convey what you have done. And I use those words advisedly because what we're seeing is the transformation of thousands, tens of thousands of units of failed public housing. Failed as physical projects because the design was wrong, and then add on top of that some of the dislocations in our society and the way they were managed. But it is simply undeniable that we could not ask Americans to live in those conditions. A part of the answer was the redesign. And the fortunate fact is that new urbanist architects, designers, planners were on hand at a critical time, and we're seeing the rebirth of entire neighborhoods, indeed entire cities. Areas of cities, as I said a moment ago, that were off limits are today available for investment. Families are moving back into them and living with dignity because the design principles are the starting point for a new way of life. Now, we have a lot to do, and I speak not just of our cities and Hope 6, but if I may be so presumptuous, in the new urbanism generally. Let me just presume and some for the contributions the new urbanists can make going forward. One of them is to make new urbanists' ideas, projects more accessible because of their affordability. We have to work on ways in order to make projects more affordable at a time that families are having such a difficult time affording housing. Very important concept. One of the ways that this can be done is to focus on how to make density acceptable and workable through design. I had a wise community leader tell me once that the antidote to NIMBY concerns about density is good design, which speaks to me volumes about the contributions the new urbanism can make. Arthur Nelson of Virginia Tech, I understand, is on the program here at this conference that will and talk about some of those issues. But the potential for density translates into what some called natural affordability, because the units can be slightly smaller, square footage is slightly smaller, more on the same acreage, designed well with new urbanist principles. The result can be to achieve some level of natural affordability. Still, another challenge going forward is to recognize environmental responsibility. The new urbanism starts with a higher level of environmental responsibility because of the emphasis on centrality, infill, and incorporation of principles. But the use of appropriate materials and the linkage to transportation nodes, all of these will contribute to a better environmental record. Recycling of older city areas. This new urbanism can make immense contributions going forward, not just as a sort of green grass set of developments, but the hard and patient work required to clear out older city areas, to deal with the environmental mitigation dimensions in order to recycle entire neighborhoods. I'm convinced that the most durable form of economic development, of community building for most cities, is the construction of homes for middle-class families in a city. As a mayor, I worked long hours trying to get commercial developers to come downtown and build come into the central city and build a commercial district, a shopping district, when if we'd built 200 units of middle-class homes, the businesses would have followed. Very important. It will be important for new urbanists to understand the contributions that immigrants and minorities will make in the workforce of the future. The demographic change before our country is stunning. When you look at what the makeup of the growth, projected growth of the population is going to be, it is amazing the degree to which it will be minority and immigrant. So not only is it important to think about these populations, what they can afford, where they want to live, even whether there can be adjustments on basic building models in order to get closer to the kind of housing that they want. I think it's an important theme coming forward. That's a challenge. A young man, Michael Mendez, who I first met when he wrote his thesis at MIT about 8 years ago or so, coined a phrase, the Latino new urbanism, basically asserting that many Latino families are sort of naturals for the concepts of the new urbanism because families know the style from their native countries, but equally importantly sort of live with sociable natures, extended family relationships, multi-generational and stuff, which sort of make for interesting new urbanist ideas. I think that's true of many other communities, immigrant communities in the United States, and I think the door is wide open to those who make adjustments in style and design and materials and colors and streetscape to relate to the growth of ethnic communities. The financial architecture of home building will have to be thought through, including the creation of new forms of capital that can be brought to this field. I'm working in a nonprofit role right now, in addition to my own company, to aggregate capital that can allow for greater affordability by accepting lower returns, working with foundations and their program-related investments and faith-based groups and banks with CRA obligations to create funds that will accept not high teens returns, as many money requires, but maybe 6% returns, and in some cases even less than that, in order to get closer to affordability. We'll have to experiment and think through new sources of financing if we really want to get the new urbanism within the reach of more families. And finally, it will be important to focus on the human capital services and the challenges that confront families in the human capital arena. The quality of schools, the recognition that the home is the platform for the family stability that allows families to move their children forward in society. And then the big theme that mayors are dealing with across the country today, a kind of new approach to human services, is the concept they called asset building, helping families use earned income tax credit and individual development accounts and tax preparation help and thousands of other things that help them keep the money they earn, use it better. And home is integrated into those notions so completely, not only the cost of the house, but the sustainable affordability over time using community land trusts and other strategies to get there. So all of these come together at an important time. We now know that design shapes our urban places. And we believe that the new urbanism will be an increasingly important contributor to contemporary design in American metropolitan areas. And we see how its principles reach beyond design to profound dimensions of our way of life. Some of our nation's greatest historic epics, the truly important dynamics that have built the foundation of our way of life, our nation's economic maturation, the evolution of our jobs base, our acceptance of immigrants, the processes of democratic participation, the ascent of the middle class, the emergence of public education as the force that it is. These have been so transformative because of our urban and metropolitan places. The continuing challenges before us in the new century will also play out in physical space, in our metropolitan areas, in our cities, and in our neighborhoods. They include creating real inclusiveness of opportunity, harnessing human potential, integrating new Americans to play their part in civic action and leadership, growing in wise and responsible ways. These challenges we must address in these places which we have built, in the places we need, in the places we love. Let me close to you today by just sharing with you a favorite quotation which has come to mind recently because of the television series on John Adams. These are words that John Adams wrote to his wife Abigail, and to me they capture the preciousness of an American idea of progress across generations, across time. This is what he wrote. It's not directly applicable to this conversation, but I'm going to try to make it so. Here's what he said. He said, "I must study politics and war, that my sons have liberty to study mathematics and philosophy. My sons ought to study mathematics and philosophy, geography, natural history, architecture, navigation, commerce, and agriculture in order to give their children a right to study painting and poetry and music and architecture, statuary, tapestry, and porcelain." It sort of makes the argument for the survival skills in the nation's founding years, followed by the building skills to create a society that grows things and builds things. to create a society where human nature can be exalted to its highest levels. A nice thought of progression. I wrote a 21st century version of that, and I'd like to read it to you. My father's generation won a war against fascism, tamed an economic depression, led a resurgent national growth, explored new frontiers of space, held firm throughout the Cold War, and conquered diseases like polio, so that my generation could advance civil rights, broaden opportunities for women, temper the pain of the economic cycles, raise environmental awareness, and use technology to connect people and nations, so that our children's generation can apply genetic discoveries to end diseases like cancer, create life choices for people in every strata of society, sustain our global environment, create new art forms and designs to exalt the human spirit and inspire peace and respect and spiritual understanding in the world. I once heard the pastor of Ebenezer Baptist Church say that if you have any instinct to reach for immortality, then you must engage in causes that are larger than yourself and undertake commitments that last beyond your years. I believe that in the new urbanism, we have a cause that is larger than any of us and is a legacy that can last far beyond our time. It is that important as a theory of design. It is more important as a way to help Americans live their lives. Thank you very much for the opportunity to come over and express my respect.